Okay, welcome everybody. And as we are recognizing Disability Voting Rights Week, my name is Martin Delaney. I'm honored to be the chair of the Global Disability Caucus. I'm a senior woman with gray hair. I'm wearing a patterned dress, and I'm sitting in front of a large abstract painting of 3rd Street in San Francisco. This caucus and our co-sponsors, the Global Veterans and Military Family and Seniors Caucuses, are delighted and grateful that you've joined us to hear about the patterns and experiences of voting for people with disabilities, including the significant issues facing them in the past, now, and most certainly in the future. The right to vote is a fundamental aspect of our democracy, but over the years, far too many people with disabilities have been unable to exercise this right because of unnecessary barriers. Having recently seen participation growing, the administration's attempts to stifle the vote now require massive vigilance, resistance, and action. Of course, it's not surprising that the current administration and its satellites are creating onerous burdens, but the unconstitutional nature of them and their severity are shocking. The Brennan Center provided a research report on this subject, which highlighted, among other things, attempts to burden voters to the point where it may be impossible for them to vote, as with the SAVE Act, targeting and threatening certain election officials and nonprofits, ignoring the ADA and other regulations, requiring specific, often unavailable IDs, challenging the use of various voting machines, seizing voting records, weaponizing federal agencies, penalizing law firms or penalizing law firms, supporting election deniers, including appointing 4 of them as cabinet members, undermining prosecution of election subversion, as with the January 6th rioters, dismantling CISA, which is the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, which provides cyber and physical security of election systems, and shifting focus from protecting voters to eliminating the ability to vote. Remember, 1 in 4 people across the U.S. and around the globe has 1 or more disabilities. Process of voting based on multiple pieces of legislation must be made as accessible for them as for anyone else. Instead, people with disabilities are suffering disproportionately from these suppression efforts. You can go to democratsabroad.org to see highlights of the ways you can fight those efforts. You can go to vote. Did I say Democrats Abroad? Then you can go to Vote From Abroad to help you keep track of the unique and oft-changing rules in your state, as well as for help getting through the process. And on democratsabroad.org/DC, there's extensive information and resources specifically on voting and other things for people with disabilities. So today our guests are a dedicated team of professors, Doug Kruse and Lisa Scher, who have focused for 30 years or more than 30 years on disability rights in the U.S. Let me tell you a little bit about them. Professor Doug Kruse has a Ph.D. in economics from Harvard University. He conducts econometric studies on employee ownership, profit sharing, disability, worker displacement, and wage differentials. His book, Profit Sharing, Does It Make a Difference, actually won Princeton's Richard A. Lester Prize as the year's outstanding book in labor economics and industrial relations. Some of his other books are Disability and the Future of Work, The Citizen's Share, Reducing Inequality in the 21st Century, and People with Disabilities, Sidelined or Mainstreamed. He has published over 150.
Maybe we should just go to the talks by Professor Kruse and Professor Scher, and then we can, Marty can follow up and talk about Professor Scher at greater length. Professor Kruse, is that okay for you two if you're not introduced right away?
Why don't we do that? We don't need to.
Yeah, we don't need a big introduction.
Let me just, I need to share my screen. Is that visible to everyone? Disability and voting?
It is. It is. You might want to go to slideshow if that's what you're doing.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I found when I go to slideshow that it doesn't show up on screen. So let me just stick with that, and I will let Lisa start us off.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for inviting us to this important forum. I'm a woman with brown hair and tortoiseshell glasses, and I am going to start us off, and we're going to basically do a tag team here. I'm going to talk about the first 12 slides and then hand it over to Doug. So as Marnie mentioned, we've been working in this field for over 30 years. And I'm glad to see that it's gained a lot more attention than when we started. So yes, we're going to talk about disability and voting today. So the first question we have is, what was voter turnout of people with disabilities like in the last national elections, the 2024 elections? And among people who voted who had disabilities, how accessible was the experience? How did the turnout and accessibility compare to the experiences of voters without disabilities? And very important, has there been progress in voter turnout and accessibility compared to past elections? So to answer these and other questions, we give turnout results from analysis of the Census Bureau's current population survey voting and registration supplement in November 2024. And that's a big mouthful, but that's one of the best data sources we have. And we also review data on disability and voting difficulties since 2012. And that includes some November 2024 results from questions that we added to the post-election voting technology survey that we developed that was sponsored by the US Election Assistance Commission. So to start, how do we define disability? It's defined in the census survey if people answer yes to one or more of the following 6 questions. Do you have a hearing impairment? Do you have a visual impairment, a cognitive impairment, difficulty walking or climbing stairs, difficulty inside the home, such as in dressing or bathing, or difficulty going outside the home and doing errands alone? And our survey also included a 7th broad question. Do you have a long-term health problem or impairment that limits the kind or amount of work, housework, or other activities that you do? The latest result from the Census Bureau data shows that 20 million people with disabilities voted in 2024, and that represents 13% of all the voters. Now, voter turnout decreased from 2020 to 2024, but it decreased less. This is really interesting. It decreased less among people with disabilities than among people without disabilities. Since 2016, turnout increased more among people with disabilities than among people without disabilities. You see a 5.2 point increase among people with disabilities compared to a 3.9 point increase among people without disabilities. Now, despite the overall decrease in disability turnout from 2020 to 2024, and we can speculate about the reasons for that. I think Marnie mentioned a few, but turnout did increase among people with several different types of disabilities. And in particular, people with hearing impairments, visual impairments, and listed mental or cognitive impairments. Now, this is very interesting also. State laws on mail ballot access seem to make a big difference. States that remained or switched to everybody vote by mail, or that changed to a no excuse system, you don't have to give a reason why you want to vote by mail, between 2016 and 2024 had larger increases in disability turnout relative to other states. And you can see in red here, states that remained all vote by mail. There was 3 states. The increase in turnout from 2016 to 2024, you see an 8.8% increase among people with disabilities. That's compared to 3.3% increase among people without disabilities. If you changed from you have to give an excuse or a reason why you want to vote by mail, like you have to say you have a disability, to I just want to vote by mail, you see an 8% increase among people with disabilities compared to a 4.5% increase among those without disabilities. And among states, there were 5 plus the District of Columbia, that changed from you have to give an excuse to everybody votes by mail. You see an 8.5% increase among people with disabilities compared to 6.6 increase among people without disabilities. So it really seems to make a difference for people who want to vote who have disabilities. So how many people voted by mail? About 37% of voters with disabilities voted by mail in 2024, compared to 28% of voters without disabilities. The drop in using mail ballots from the pandemic year, 2020 to 2024, was similar for voters with and without disabilities. Also, over a quarter of voters with and without disabilities voted early at a polling place or election office, while 35% of people with disabilities and 41% of people without voted in a polling place on election day. So while the disability turnout gap narrowed between 2016 and 2024, we still see this stubborn disability gap in turnout. People with disabilities remained less likely than people without disabilities to vote. And you can see that disability turnout gap. In 2016, it was a gap of 6.2%. It went down in 2024 to 4.9%, but that's still a lot of people. If people with disabilities voted at the same rate as otherwise similar people without disabilities, we would have seen an additional 1.7 million voters in 2024, and that definitely could have changed the outcome of important elections. So why is there this stubborn, persistent disability turnout gap? First of all, it is not explained by lower interest in politics or elections among people with disabilities, as shown by surveys. In fact, there are some surveys that indicate that people with disabilities are actually more interested in elections and politics than people without disabilities, so that's not the reason. Past research shows that the gap is partly explained by lower resources. People with disabilities tend to be poorer and to have less education, and that's connected to participation. Very important, people with disabilities tend to be more socially isolated. People with disabilities are more likely to live alone. They're less likely to be employed. They're less likely to be recruited. So they're not going to talk to as many people about voting and other forms of political participation. They also tend to have a lower belief that the political system is responsive to people like themselves. And there's probably good reason for that. And of course, voting difficulties play an important role. Inaccessible polling places and voting procedures obviously make it more difficult to vote. And they also can have psychological effects. They send the message that it doesn't matter if people with disabilities vote, that they're not really welcome in the political sphere. Next slide. So I'm going to turn now to Doug, who's going to talk about what some of the findings that we've had.
There, I was just trying to figure out how to unmute myself. Okay, like Lisa, I'm very happy to be talking with everyone here. We've been working on this for quite a while. Lisa has thrown a lot of numbers at you, and I'm going to throw even more numbers at you, but we hope to frame them in a way that it makes sense. And obviously, we'll make this PowerPoint available to anyone who wants to go through and look over our numbers more closely. We'd also like to wrap this. I'd like to make my presentation just another 8 or 10 minutes so that we have plenty of time for questions and discussion. As Lisa said, we've got this disability turnout gap. Part of this may be due to voting difficulties. So we've worked with the Election Assistance Commission to do surveys, post-election surveys in 2012, 2020, 2022, and 2024. National surveys funded by the EAC and conducted by a survey firm, SSRS. It's a major survey firm that does the polling for CNN, actually. So what do we find about difficulties in voting for people with disabilities? The difficulties in voting at polling places We're going to talk both separately about polling places and then about voting by mail, which may be more relevant to Democrats abroad, obviously. But looking at polling places, difficulties declined from 2012 to 2020, from 30% to 18%. They increased slightly in 2024 to 21%. I'll say more about that in the next slide. Still, that despite that decline, the difficulty rate in 2024 was twice the rate of 11% among people without disabilities. So there's progress, but still ways to go. Our polling place is actually more accessible since 2012. About half of the decline in difficulties voting in person for people with disabilities appears due to progress in making polling places more accessible. And we've got several things that point to this, that actually that is good news, that polling places are more accessible. The biggest declines in difficulty were in difficulty reading or seeing the ballot, and difficulty understanding how to vote or use the voting equipment. Part of the overall decline is tied to a change in composition of polling place voters, particularly in the pandemic year of 2020. Those who expected the most difficulties switched to voting by mail in 2020. So you don't have as many people who would encounter problems in polling places actually going to polling places. Likewise, the small increase in voting difficulties from 2020 to 2024 is largely explained by people with more severe disabilities, of more voting difficulties, returning to voting at polling places rather than voting by mail. People with disabilities, lots of people with disabilities like voting at a polling place, as we'll see here shortly. What kinds of difficulties do people face? We have 8 different kinds of difficulties we ask about that we enumerate. The most common reported difficulties in 2024 were waiting in line, reading or seeing the ballot, operating the machine, understanding how to vote or use the voting equipment. And I won't go through all these numbers here. I'll just provide an example for difficulty waiting in line. 8.6% of people with disabilities who voted in 2024 said they had difficulty waiting in line, compared to 5% of people without disabilities. Difficulty reading or seeing the ballot, 5% of people with disabilities, only 0.5% of people without disabilities. I think I said that right. So those are, that gives you a sense of some of the difficulties that are being faced. We break this up by disability type, and what really stands out here is that the biggest problems are faced by people with visual impairments. 56% of people with visual impairments who voted at the polling place said they had difficulties in doing so. Also, people with cognitive impairments, 30%, close to a third of people with cognitive impairments said they had some kind of difficulty. It was much less common among people with hearing impairments. Okay, now get difficulties voting by mail. And again, this may be most relevant to Democrats abroad. Among those voting by mail in 2024, 8% of voters with disabilities had difficulty compared to 4% of voters without disabilities. So again, about a 2-to-1 ratio. And again, the biggest problem was for people with visual impairments. 24% of voters with vision impairments had difficulties voting by mail. That often means that people with vision impairments often need the help of family members to vote, and that means that their votes are not confidential. Someone else will help you vote, help you mark your ballot, help seal it up, and so forth. They will see how you voted, and it may be that that's not a problem in your family, but in some families that can be a problem if you may not agree with the political preferences of your family members. Types of difficulties in voting by mail. The main types were difficulty receiving the ballot, 1.8%, and this is among all people who voted by mail, not just those who experienced difficulties. Among all people who voted by mail, close to 2% had difficulty receiving the ballot. 2%, 2.2% seeing the ballot, and 2.1% the ballot of the process was unclear. Need for assistance. In-person voters with disabilities were over twice as likely as those without disabilities to need voting assistance, 11% compared to 4%. And among male voters, MAIL voters with disabilities, they were 3 times more likely than those without disabilities to need voting assistance, 9% compared to 3%. In these EAC sponsored surveys, we ask not just about difficulties, we ask a few other questions that we think are interesting. One of the interesting questions we ask is, how confident are you that your vote was accurately counted? There's been obviously a lot of questioning of the election system, as Marnie was referring to. A lot of well, I won't get into that. A lot of policy debates and disputes and so forth. So we wanted to know, how confident are you your vote was accurately counted? In 2024, 2/3 of voters, both with and without disabilities, said they are confident their vote was accurately counted, 69% for each. Only 1 out of 20 in each group, between 5 and 6%, said they were not very confident or not at all confident their vote was accurately counted, which is about half the rate from 2020. 2020, it was close to 1/10 of people said they were not very confident, not at all confident. And that went down in 2024. The confidence is lowest among people with vision and cognitive impairments. Only about half of them are very confident that their vote was accurately counted. Another interesting question we ask, well, I think it's interesting. We ask everyone, both voters and non-voters, if you wanted to vote in the next election, how would you prefer to cast your vote? And we give them 5 options. Close to half, 48% of people with disabilities, and just slightly over half, 54% of people without disabilities, would prefer voting in person inside a polling place. And I think this is really interesting because oftentimes, when we have discussions about disability voting, we'll have people who say, well, people with disabilities can just vote by mail. We don't need to put such an emphasis on making polling places accessible. It turns out people with disabilities, half of them, want to vote in a polling place. There's a certain demonstrative aspect, and I'm a person with a disability myself. I like going to a polling place and having people see me in my wheelchair voting. That I'm part of our citizenry. I'm part of our democracy. So there is some personal meaning there to voting in person in a polling place. About half of people with disabilities say they want to do that. But it is true, and Lisa presented the statistics on this, that people with disabilities are more likely than people without disabilities to vote by mail. Over 1/4, 28% of people with disabilities said they would prefer to vote by mail, compared to 1/5 of people without disabilities. Our other 3 options did not differ significantly by disability. Close to 1/5, about 20%, said they would like to vote fully online by personal computer or smartphone. And I'm sure some of you are able to vote online under the UOCAVA Act. 3 to 4% chose filling out a ballot online and printing and mailing it, electronic ballot delivery, which is an interesting way that people with visual impairments can vote confidentially at home. They vote on their computer, they print it out, they put it in an envelope, and then their family members don't have to see how they voted. And 1 to 2% chose voting by drive-through or curbside. So we've thrown a lot of numbers at you, as I say, a lot of ideas, a lot of concepts. What are the key takeaways here? Key takeaways, first of all, voting accessibility for people with disabilities has improved since 2012. That's obviously good news. But there's still a voting gap between people with and without disabilities, as Lisa said, a real stubborn gap. Despite the progress, 1 in 5 voters with disabilities report difficulties in voting in a polling place. 1 in 12 report difficulties in voting by mail. And they're twice as likely as voters without disabilities to experience these difficulties, which points to the need for continued progress in improving accessibility and ensuring people with disabilities can easily exercise their right to vote. Thank you. Here's the last slide. We've got link. We were glad to give you access to more of the work we've done in the past. This I should note this picture. This picture is actually of me. I use a wheelchair. I have a spinal cord injury. And here's a picture of me voting at the polling place. When we went in there, we asked the polling place officials, can Lisa take a picture of me voting? They said, no, you can't do that. That's your vote is confidential. No. We're going to close the curtain and just have Lisa take a picture of me from behind the curtain. And they said, oh, okay, that's fine. So that's me exercising my my right to vote. And that's where I want to leave it. Again, we are very happy to talk to you, to answer any questions, or to hear your experiences. And we are planning more work in this area. We would like to actually expand our efforts quite a bit to provide some realistic solutions to some of the barriers that people with disabilities face. So we would like to hear what kinds of barriers you think you may face and what kinds of things should be done. Done.
Oh, that's great. Thank you both so much for sharing all that information with you. This is Marnie. Sorry. For sharing all that information with you. It's it's quite amazing because it's different. It's rare to be able to get information about people with disabilities. We're so often left out of research. So we love that you are able to, on this important issue of voting, that you're able to share that with us, and that you've had enough dedication to be able to keep going over all these years. I'm going to introduce Art Shankler, who is chair of the Global Seniors Caucus, and he has a few things to say and or ask, and then he's going to handle your questions. So please, if you have a question, do type it in the chat box, or just you can type * hand up to be called on, or just whatever, type in whatever you want if you can't find those stars. So Art, it's all yours.
Hi, thank you, Marty, and thank you, Dr. Schur and Dr. Kruse. Just a couple things. One, we also rely on Election Assistance Commission surveys to tell us how we did. They do a survey every year of the state voting election offices to find out how many people actually voted from overseas, which greatly informs what we do. So we're joined at the hip in that respect, as well as, facing difficulties in voting. As you mentioned, I think it's Angela, you'll probably correct me. I think it's still 18. We are allowed, obviously, to vote by mail, and in some states, I think the majority of states, we can in fact vote electronically, either by going on an online portal or an email attachment, which has its privacy issues, or even by fax. Yes, lots of states still use faxes. So again, very sympathetic. And I just want to say, as somebody who believes very much that statistics should drive a lot of our efforts and how we devote our resources, I am very happy about this presentation. I look forward to looking at it more closely. And finally, I'll just say on behalf of the Global Seniors Council, I am very happy to support this webinar. There's an obvious overlap between the concerned seniors and those with disabilities. First and foremost is that the percentage of the population with disabilities, I believe you guys are the experts, I'm sure you'll correct me, but is highest among seniors, estimated at 25 to 50% from what I've read, and even higher in those above 75. Plus,
Absolutely.
the cutbacks that we're seeing in Medicare and Medicaid, will affect an increasing number of older Americans. I know you may not want to get political, but particularly those with disabilities, as options, we don't access Medicare or Medicaid overseas, which is another issue, a big issue for us. But many of us may be considering going home as we get older. And we'd like to see, that options for nursing homes, to be covered by Medicaid, which I think is going to go by the board, are going to be reduced as a result of the cuts that have been made under the big, whatever you want to call it, bill. And I should say, within Democrats abroad, seniors are the largest age cohort and the largest source of donations as well. In terms of voting, not just with Democrats abroad, but I think seniors continue to be the age cohort with the highest turnout in elections. I think it's about 75% generally. I don't know if you've got stats on that, which is something I can ask you about. Although this also reduces with age, which may have something to do with disabilities. I think I read a study recently as I was preparing for this. I think it was in Finland, not in the US, but it shows that the reduction as you get older is actually not related to age, but how close you are to death. In other words, it relates to your physical health rather than your actual age. And I apologize for being so morbid, but as a future former senator from Iowa has told us all, we're all going to die. So we need to take that into consideration. Again, this correlation, to me at least, suggests that the downturn in turnout as people get older and older, as opposed to getting higher as you get older, is related to health and potential disability rather than just getting older. And as you mentioned, threats to mail-in voting are likely to affect seniors the most, and disabled seniors even more, and disabled seniors who live overseas even more. Although there's a lot of, as I think you mentioned that people with disability like to vote in person. There's a lot of evidence that seniors like going to vote in person as well. And in fact, I read somewhere that they're the most they're the most supportive of reduction of restrictions on mail-in voting, while they are the highest age cohort for mail-in voting as well. So a little contradictions there, but I guess it makes sense within the psyche of people want to do something that they've been doing for years. And I think it's for many, it is becoming increasingly. So it's important that all of us follow these developments closely and vote. With that, I will ask people to put in questions in the chat box or in the Q&A section, and we will get to them either by calling on you or just reading them out, or put your hand up, and that's fine. We'll try to get to you. I guess I was going to ask whether in all of your data you have looked at these issues as they relate to seniors or as people get older, particularly those with disabilities. And as you mentioned, maybe you can begin to look at the overseas Americans community as well, where turnout is unfortunately very low compared with the population in the US. And if I could interject based on what you said, I could ask one more question about when you said that waiting in line is one of the biggest drawbacks to people, or the difficulties of people, having just been in the airport where they have priority lines for people with disabilities or other, problems, or, just need to get to priority. Is there any consideration of that in voting centers? Thanks. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. There
yes,
is obviously, as you stated, there's a very strong connection between age and disability. And we do see overall a kind of a curvilinear relationship that older people are more likely to vote than younger people, but that does drop off about after the age of 75. That is due, exactly as you say, to the limitations, physical limitations that people are experiencing. We find that when people, one of the studies we did found that people who do not report any limitations, their voter turnout continues to go up through into their 90s. So the issues faced by people with disabilities very, very, very heavily overlap with the issues faced by seniors as they're getting older.
if I could just, I'm sorry, I'm going to sneeze in a second. I have allergies, apologies. But
Isn't they?
the, thank you.
Whatever language we can add from this international.
Yes, that's right. Anyway, just the issue about waiting in line is really interesting. We've done focus groups also with people with disabilities and talking about their experiences. And it really varies by polling place. So in some polling places, there's a clear sign that says, this is a priority line. And if you need, some poll workers are trained so that they see somebody who, is in a wheelchair or has an obvious disability, they can move them to the front of the line. Other places, either don't have a sign or the sign is really hard to see or understand.
Especially if you're at the back of the line.
Yeah, exactly. And the other issue is there are a lot of people with invisible disabilities, and that seems to have actually increased in recent years. I'm talking about things like severe anxiety, things like that, and they're kind of in a bind because poll workers won't see them as meeting a priority, or they have to identify themselves, and that can be difficult. And sometimes poll workers don't believe them, so it's a tricky issue, right? And it's just that it varies so much. Even within one state, one polling place can be really good with that, and another polling place can be really bad. So it just isn't consistent.
I think a good example of that would be long COVID. A
Yeah.
growing number
Yeah.
of people
Yes.
are experiencing long COVID. Well, it's not obvious to a
Right.
poll worker that you have long COVID. You may say, I'm tired. I don't want to stand in line. They say, well, you don't look disabled to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Art, I think I'm
Before I
next.
call on you, Marty, I just want to add one thing from the age perspective is that I know people are going to say this ages, but also technical literacy
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
lower, and this affects, the ability to use alternative forms of voting. So anyway, I'll just add, Marty,
Yeah.
I think you're in the queue.
Yeah, I am in the queue. I think, first of all, I think one of the remarkable things is that this is all against the law, basically. A lot of the things, the lack of training is appalling in some areas, and the disregard for people's needs, and the tendency, you're right, to think the worst, or to not believe people, I guess is the way to say it, is not it's just drives me crazy. But I'm wondering, what y'all, I know this is, if you get out your crystal balls, we have a lot of things that we already know are going to happen, or at least going to be attempted, that affect things like voting by mail, which is really, really important to us. And I wonder if, given the trends going forward, and what you've seen in the past, both, by the way, both in terms of voter suppression, but also, things like in the U.S., the violence that, or potential violence that's happening from in certain cities, and just the potential of that. How would you think that those things might impact, the ways people vote, but also whether or not they do vote? I know it is crystal ball, but sorry.
Yeah, we're not good prognosticators, if I can say that. Just picking up on one thing you said about voter suppression. We actually have been expert witnesses in several lawsuits that when states have made it more difficult to vote in various ways. And one of the points we make, one of the themes here, is that when you make it more difficult to vote, that especially hurts the ability of people with disabilities to vote. Almost always, every measure that kind of raises the bar, raises the costs of voting, especially hurts people with disabilities. So there's a disparate impact that can occur there. So that's a concern about the about the efforts to restrict voting. Of course, Trump said, what was this, last month or so, that now he wants to get rid of voting
Man,
by mail. I don't think he's going to be able to do that. There's just too many people across the ideological spectrum who like voting by mail. So I don't honestly don't see that happening. But what do I know? I'm not a political prognosticator.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is that a lot of things are communicated by local, oftentimes Republican, um, voting officials. So
Mhm.
so we'll see, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
I mean,
Um,
you're absolutely right, Marnie, that when we did focus groups, we found that anxiety was definitely higher than it had been, and people spontaneously mentioned the fear of violence. And I know that this isn't like statistically significant, but I just remember this one participant who was a man of color with a disability, and he said, I'm really terrified. I go in there and I see these people with their signs, with their weapons, and I'm just really scared, and I don't know if I'm going to continue to vote. So, I think it's a real concern. We'll see what happens in the midterm elections too. I think that's
yeah,
going to affect this.
There's always a place for
yes.
you here, or somewhere around the world.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thanks. By the way, I live in Serbia. I should have mentioned that.
Oh,
And I have, I think, what is now called salt and pepper hair. I think our next question is from Lisette Nelson. Lisette, if you could remind us where you're from. You don't need to mention your hair color, though. Just tell us where you're from.
Thank you. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can. Thank you.
Okay, great. I am living in France. I vote in New Jersey. And my question is kind of a two-part question. But I'm thinking, when I was working in the States, I worked as an attorney for people with disabilities, and especially people with cognitive and psychiatric disabilities. So a lot of people who are in institutions, and there were all kinds of efforts and programs to encourage people to vote from within the institution. But for people who are homebound, obviously they're not in a place where they're just there and you can go talk to them. But I'm just wondering if the parties or nonprofit organizations or anybody is doing like specific outreach. I mean, if there's a voting population that wants to vote and has trouble doing so, it seems like people should be making an active, um, approach to them to see what they need and how they can help and to try and get them to vote more. So that's one thing. And the other thing is just in the same vein, but I've done a lot of get out the vote kind of work, calling people, and one of the questions that you ask at the end is usually, do you need any help getting to the polls or anything like that? And so are these people just being missed in those get out the vote? Because it seems like if people are homebound, they should be, easy to reach. And if they voted before, they're on a list. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, why isn't there more kind of proactive steps, to help people
That,
get out, rather than just saying, well, once you get to the poll, you might, come encounter a problem or, okay.
that's a really good point. I mean, as you say, people who are homebound should be easy to reach. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will be reached. Actually, they may not be as easy to reach if they don't have internet access. We
mm,
find that people with disabilities are about 3 times more likely than people without disabilities to lack internet access.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Oh, really?
that's an issue. But I think it has to do more with not that they're, you know, hard to reach. You can go knock on their doors or give them a call or something like that. I think it's just that in the course of everyday life, when you get out and about, say you go to work, your coworkers will ask, "Oh, hey, have you voted yet?" Um, that's one of the kind of forms of perhaps subtle social pressure to vote that seems to matter for people actually voting. And people with disabilities are only half as likely as people without disabilities to be employed. And I'm talking about working age people here. So they're less likely to encounter that kind of subtle social pressure, whether it's explicitly recruiting you to vote for someone or it's just asking you, hey, have you voted yet? People with disabilities, because of their greater social isolation, are not as likely to encounter that.
If I could just give a shout out to Rev Up right now.
Yeah.
For people who are homebound and do have internet access, there are efforts by groups like Rev Up, which are internet based and encourage people to vote and provide information on voting. And we've worked with them too. I think they're a great organization.
They are, I'm going to jump in. They are, and I think that they also collaborate with. They have a lot of partners, and many of the partners are local, are small organizations, which I think is the opportunity here. They're small organizations that know people. I mean, they know the people who have disabilities. That's always the hardest thing, is to identify. I was going to actually ask you. I'm going to go back to that in a second, but so I think Rev Up, the fact that they do work with, countless of these little organizations, that's another way that I have to, applaud them. I'm gonna just, I wish I could remember what I was just gonna ask you. But I do have another question, which it goes back to something Art said, and that is going to, what would be some of the ways that we might be able to explore getting information here abroad, meaning around the globe, that's here for us. There are a lot of there are restrictions on the ability to write to people or contact people without them having said it's okay. That's one of our biggest barriers. But I wonder if the EAC, or if you can think of any way, maybe we need to do this sort of country by country, figure it out. But how could we maybe get some of these abroad voters? I was doing some Art, you'd be better at this than me, but I was doing than I am. But that I tried to think. Took a low number for the Americans abroad. It's up to 9 million, but let's say it's 4 million who might be of voting age and whatever. And taking a low number, and then I just multiplied it by 2%, just like 2% voting, which is sort of more in our league, and it came out to 800,000 voters, and every percentage obviously brings that up, and it's worth it to be able to
I
find
failed
them.
calculus, but that's 20%, I think.
That's 20%. It is 20%. That's what I meant. And yeah, that's what I actually wrote, but it's too little. I can't read it. But I think the ability to find these people is, we don't even know how many Americans are abroad, or where they are, or how to get in touch. Now, there are certain things that we occasionally can do with voting rolls and so on, but it's very tricky. And I think I'm putting this into your head more than anything, because I don't know that you could ever come up with a great answer off the top of your head. But I think it's a huge opportunity. And Art and I have discussed whether people who develop a disability might go back to the U.S. for, if they have to go to a retirement community or a care facility. And I don't know if that's, it's certainly not always true, and there must be little clusters of people here and there, but we haven't found them yet. We haven't even figured out how to try and do it. But but anyway, I would love to know what's stopping them from voting. And I would guess that the first reason is they don't know they can, and the second reason is they don't know how, and and the third reason is probably they need help. And so I would love to do the research to find out if I'm right. So that's a long speech.
No, that's a great question, and we're not experts on the restrictions on contacting overseas voters. I'd be really interested to know more about that. But I do think a lot of the perhaps some of the low turnout by voters overseas is just that they're not in a community that's voting, where people are asking, have you voted yet, and so forth. I'm sure that in many places it's a pain to
Mhm.
I don't know, you have to go down to the embassy and or whatever to be able to get a vote, register a vote, fax your vote, whatever. Um, I did want to mention that so we'd be interested in talking to you more about that. Also, be very interested in talking more about the voting online. Um,
Mhm.
Lisa and I just did a report that's going to be coming out by the EAC on voting technology, and we ask, and I think, yeah, I think everyone was in the continental United States. Um, we did a survey of 2,000 people, and we only had just a handful, just I don't know, three, four, five, who had used a who'd been able to vote online. So we didn't have a sample of
Right.
people who a good enough sample of people to be able to assess their experiences reliably. But we really like to do that because that's, in particular, young people often say, "Hey, I do everything else on my smartphone. Why can't I vote?" Um,
Mhm.
so
Well,
that's
yeah, the
lively
first thing you
debate.
want to do is go to votefromabroad.org, because that's our voter assistance and voter musings
Information, also in voter information site.
information.
Yeah.
Yeah, information,
And-
support, and process, I think. In fact, tomorrow we're having a little ad, a commercial break. Tomorrow we're having an event at the same time as we did with you at 12 noon Eastern, where Heidi Birch, who is, our chief um,
Get out the vote.
get out the vote person. Yeah, thank you, Art.
Sorry.
Between the two of us. But anyway, Heidi is going to be speaking and explaining the intricacies of that process
Mm.
of voting from abroad, and you might find it
Mhm.
interesting. And if you don't have the time, we'll record it.
Yeah.
So I think that might be really helpful.
Yeah, we
Now
can
that I
also
think
get
about it.
I'm sure Heidi can give us a list of the states that do have online portals for voting.
Yeah,
That'd
And
be
yes, there
great.
is
yes,
some concern
Yeah.
about security, but from all the reports, it works pretty well and it is secure.
yeah. Yeah,
So,
I think the big thing now is that everything changes. They're changing everything, where you can vote by mail, where you can vote, whatever.
well,
And so
yeah.
it's important, I think, to have a resource like Vote, because that's one thing Heidi does really, really well, is keep track of
And
of,
I don't
of
think
what's
this has
going on.
affected the online portals, but I should mention, sorry
Yeah,
to jump in, but
no,
'cause that's what I do, interrupt. But
me too. Me too.
yeah, is that some states on their online voting websites have actually put up geo-blocking, so that people who are overseas and don't have a US VPN can't actually access the site. Supposedly this was done to keep those Ruskies from coming in and
Ah,
interrupting the voting, but it's
ah,
certainly affected many of our members and many Americans
Hmm.
overseas. We
Yeah,
keep pushing back against it, but I think it still continues
yeah,
to exist.
interesting.
Something that Heidi will certainly know about better than
right.
me. So
And
interesting.
people are told, there are people are told even by poll, workers, that they can't do this, they can't do that. The standing in line thing. I mean, the ADA says that you need to be provided a chair or something. You need to be provided accommodation. I think that's one of the things we're going to have on our website, are all the ADA and other legislation rules that apply to people. Like, I know a lot of not a lot, but many Americans from people in our organization go back to the United States to vote,
Yeah.
just because, again, they like to be, part of the action there. And when you do that, you're going to encounter this sort of thing. And you're supposed to you're supposed to be accommodated so that you're having the same experiences or abilities to do things as
Mhm.
anybody would. And that's that's not happening. I mean, that's not consistently enough. That's, to me, that was already a gap, to use your great word, and that gap is going to just get worse with the less well-trained and educated these people are in the future. And I mean the next 3-year future.
Given what some of you said, and there is one more question in the chat box, I'll get to it. But I always tell people overseas that it's actually easier to vote from overseas. I mean, we all complain about how difficult it is, but you don't have to, maybe you stand in line at the post office for 5 minutes, but you're not standing in line for 2 hours. Or you can do it all from home if you have a state that allows for electronic mail. The change in the law 15 years ago says every state has to be willing to send you a ballot by email, so you don't have to worry about getting it in the mail or anything like that. So in some ways, it is easier and takes actually less time. You don't have to go down to your polling place to vote from overseas, but we still suffer from low turnout. There was one more question from Christine Herring. I don't know, Christine, do you want to say it yourself, or it was about, do we have predictions about what's going to happen with vote by mail? And I don't know, I will join you in saying that I think it's pretty clear that the president does not have the power to dictate this. Article whatever of the Constitution, notwithstanding. What he claims Article 2 powers, but Article 4, I think, says the states run elections.
Do you know, Doug and Lisa, do you know, or professors, I should say, do you know, about the situation we're in where many, what is it, 25 countries are not allowing us to mail packages, and in some cases they haven't. The people in the postal services don't really get that doesn't mean letters. So in effect, we're being cut off from mailing mail.
Yes.
in many cases.
Yes.
So so that's like another and it's another insidious way that we're having to untangle. And the reason, I should say, the reason for that is tariffs. So it can be directly tied back to this administration. So not that
One
I want
almost
to
might think it's deliberate. One might.
Yes, imagine. Yeah. It's voter suppression, it's all sort of tied together in the core of what he came in raring to go to get rid of all of the DEIA sentiment and belief in the country and support and ability. It's not just that he makes fun of and imitates people with disabilities. He is deliberately trying to take away support and rights for people. And it's not the only group, and it's anybody but him in some ways. So that's why
we are a partisan organization. So
well,
I think they knew that.
It's in the name. It's in the name. But
I just want to say also that one of the things that we do, we have, I guess I can say it with you, that our sympathies are definitely with you, but we present our work as nonpartisan, because if you look at the population of people with disabilities as a whole, it's very similar to the US population as a whole. It's not that people with disabilities skew significantly more in favor of the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. Now, on certain issues like healthcare, you're going to see some differences, but some things that we find that maybe we don't like it, like if we make voting more accessible, which we absolutely are committed to, we have to accept that, there are going to be Republicans who are voting too, and that's okay, because that's what a democracy is supposed to be. That's what it's supposed to be. So we really presented as nonpartisan, although again, our personal views aligned with you.
Yeah.
May God forgive me. I have helped many Republicans vote over the years.
Uh,
I
d-
just wanted to respond to Christine's question directly here about where we are voting by mail. And I, as I said before, I'm not a prognosticator here. I do think we now have, I believe, 8 states that are all vote by mail and in DC, and we've seen a movement toward that. I think the popularity of vote by mail, was certainly increased by people's experience of it during the pandemic. I really, really don't see the political dynamics that would shift away from voting by mail. I expect we're going to see an increased trend toward it. But the something that Lisa and I often say when we're talking to journalists or to groups like this is that our our recommendation at a broad level is that there should be as many ways to vote as possible, because people with disabilities have a variety of restrictions. There's a variety of types of disability. All the vision impairments, hearing impairments, mobility impairments, and so forth. And what works well for one person with a disability won't work well for another. Therefore, there should be a whole variety of ways for people to vote, so that each person can pick the way that works best for them.
mhm.
And we shouldn't just have everyone has to go to the polling place the way that Trump says. We should have a whole variety of ways so that everyone can vote, even if they don't vote the way I want them to.
Yeah, I know, right? I just am gonna. I think I agree with you, Doug, but I also want to say that I didn't think that everybody said Social Security is sacred and they'll never go after Social Security. And yeah, well, look what we have now. So I don't want to rule out that they could go after voting by mail. I don't think so, but I don't want to put it off the table either.
Oh, they'll go after it. They just won't succeed, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not as optimistic as you are,
And
but
Social Security affects not only seniors, but those with disabilities, right?
Oh, very
absolutely,
much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
absolutely, yeah.
and as does Medicare.
Yeah.
Um, definitely under threat. Yeah. Are you familiar with the SAVE Act?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's another way that that would affect us. Like, I'm not going back to the
And there's
US to
something
vote.
called the PROVE Act, which would affect us even
Yes.
more. We would all end
Yeah.
up voting for or against Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Yeah, yeah. They're
Seriously,
pushing us all into
seriously, yes.
DC to vote. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway,
well, yeah.
I was just going to ask,
Did,
I don't see any more questions in the chat box, but
did Angela have a question? I think she had her hand up. No? Oh, no, that was me. Never mind.
But we should remind people to sign up for the event tomorrow. The link's in the chat box.
Yeah. And
Professor Shore and Kruse, you're both welcome to join.
and we hope that you'll be members of, if you're not already, of Democrats Abroad, and join the various caucuses, especially the disability and senior and veterans and military families. And that's a whole nother area we didn't get into, but we could at some point. And then we're going to, just so you know, we're going to, if you go to again, Democrats Abroad .org/DC, much of the information that you might want or need is going to be there. And you can always write to us at Disability Caucus at Democrats Abroad and or .org, and we will try and answer or get an answer to any questions you might have, and or point you in the right direction. Yeah. So a shout out, a shout out to our speakers, first of all, to our guests, because it's like my brain is
Professor Shore
exploding.
went unintroduced, by the way. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Should I go back?
No, it's okay.
I'm gonna. So I'm sorry. That was I don't know why my computer conked out, but I live in the woods, so you know sometimes big birds can do that. So so yeah, we really really appreciate it, and actually really look forward to, you know, just talking more, because there are just all kinds of questions that are I know in Art's head are popping, and are also in mine. So thank you to Art and to Angela for helping with this event. Please consider also donating to Democrats Abroad, and you can go on our website for that too. And then I again
It
hope
was
you'll join us
recorded.
tomorrow.
Christine has asked whether it was recorded. It was, and it will be
Oh yeah,
sent out
We'll
to our
put that.
caucuses, sent out the link, sent out to our
We're gonna on the caucuses and on YouTube.
Yeah.
And on actually, is it Angela? Is it Facebook as well, right?
It is not on Facebook, but you can look at our YouTube channel, which is Democrats
Yeah.
Abroad
Okay.
YouTube.
I don't think anyone said
Okay.
anything that we need to, whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry, maybe
Well,
we should stop the recording.
you would remember. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. And we'll let you have the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, and hope to see you tomorrow.